Everybody, it is Romania Black, and it's no big deal. It's just episode 19 of Apothecary Diaries. Yeah. So, I've been so frustrated because I have had to wait a lot longer than usual to watch this episode. And after episode 18 was over, I was like, oh my god, with all this stuff with Locken and MaoMao and everything, and Sailor Neptune, Sweet Ray, I was like, I need to watch episode 19 stat, but I've also been wanting to read The Last Eunuch in China as I go and have not been able to because of work. Everything's been so busy at work. By the time I get home, I record and then I'm exhausted. I'm ready to go to bed. So I have not had time until today to read chapter 11 in this book. We're getting towards the end of The Last Eunuch of China. Now, as I've talked about in my November update video, which I also just recorded to let you all know how far ahead I am, I have been told that there is going to be a season 2 of Apothecary Diaries. I have also been told that it is going to be immediately after I finish season 1. So the timing, right? I did the math, and I am actually going to be watching episode 24 of season 1, like the last Wednesday of January, which is exciting. So you all will see it then on YouTube the following week. So for Patreon, there'll be like a 2-week window before I get to season 2. And for YouTube, it'll probably feel like it'll still be 2 weeks, but it'll just be different. So I am going to find something to replace those 2 weeks in January, like some other thing, I'm sure, or there'll be something on Wednesday for those 2 weeks. Don't worry. But we'll talk about that in like the January update video when we get to it. But I am excited that we will be able to go on Wednesdays straight from season 1 into season 2, and I'll get to be able to watch it week to week with you all, which will be so exciting. I'll be like, yes. So as far as I know, at the moment, it's still going to be on Wednesdays for the Apothecary Diaries. Things may change between now and January as far as the days of when things are happening, but as far as that goes, you'll find out in the January update video, but I'm excited to say the least. So I've got some stuff in the book I want to talk about, but also got some comments that I want to talk about too, that I'm like, okay. I feel like these comments this week have helped me to connect some dots. And I'm like, oh, or at least have expanded upon my theories going into this episode. So William Pina, as well as Lorelei S. I'm going to read William Pina's comment, but Lorelei S. basically amounted the same thing in theirs. Said, nice job remembering the blue-eyed guy, who was also present when Jinshi's old mentor was killed. I missed that part when I originally watched it. And so, whenever I read those comments, I was like, wait, the guy that killed the one man and killed this other man had blue eyes. We talked last week that Sweet Ray has blue eyes, much like MaoMao. So is Sweet Ray the man with blue eyes that's poisoning the people? She would have access to the herbs that could do it. We talked about that on the hill, and she's the only person right now other than Locken who has blue eyes. So it could be that Sweet Ray is the nephew of Locken and is the one poisoning these people. Could be, right? Could be. And there's another reason why I thought that, and that has to do with Rhett the Best's comment, which we'll talk about here in just a second. Rhett the Best said in the light novel, and the moderators were like, okay, this comment deals with the light novel. I don't know what you want to read out of it. There's not anything particularly spoilery, but it's just some extra stuff. And I'm not going to read the light novels. I just don't have time. And reading light novels, it's taken me a lot to get through one book and doing the channel, so I can't imagine reading the light novels, so no. But so in the light novel, MaoMao makes it plain that she's deliberately not thinking about what Jinshi is. She thinks it's less trouble to only see what is presented to her rather than try to figure out a truth that could cause her trouble. And that does kind of make sense because MaoMao's the one that came up with the theory that we all are like, no, that's correct, about Jinshi being the Emperor's son and Aduo's son. She had that theory and we're like, no, that makes total sense. But she's like, oh, there's no proof. So I'm like, so it makes sense that she doesn't want to think about what Jinshi is because she'd rather not get involved. That checks out with her character. It's just eternally frustrating. Read the Best also said, I'm fairly certain that in the first episode, it says something like only eunuchs and the Emperor's kin are allowed in the inner palace. And somebody else said that as well. So if that's the case, that makes sense that she would rather think that Jinshi is a eunuch than that the possibility he's the Emperor's kin. That also to me is just like, but the people not knowing, again, we talked about it last week. And then it says, Rhett the Best says, the morning scene was actually pretty funny in the book. While MaoMao is thinking about the aphrodisiac scent thing that Jinshi is droning on and on about in the background, he asks about giving her a new room, and she snaps to attention with no idea what he said previously. I'm pretty sure that whatever he said in the room made sense, but she wasn't paying attention. It was kind of funny. She also asked for a stable because no one would bother her if she lived in a stable. She's like, I just want to get away from you all. And then it also said that the scene with Suirei was cut out an inner monologue from the anime. Basically, MaoMao says that the tall woman would be beautiful if she bothered trying to present herself that way, if she put on makeup and plucked her eyebrows. Again, I think that y'all have secretly spoiled me that Suiren is the man that's poisoning everybody because she's tall, so she could pass as a man as far as her height. She doesn't pluck her eyebrows, so it looks a little bit more masculine, traditional masculine. She doesn't normally wear makeup, and she doesn't have a big bosom. So either she is a woman biologically. She is biologically a woman that just is able to pass as a man for those scenes, or she is actually a man who's trans. She's actually a trans woman that could do both. I don't know if Suirei, because Suiren is the granny watching over Jinshi. I don't know if Suirei is a trans woman or if Suirei is just a woman that is disguising herself as a traditional man to go and do these murders. But I think they're one and the same. I think they're one and the same person. I think you all have helped me connect the dots without realizing it. And so that's what I think. So we'll see if I'm proven right. We'll see if I'm proven right on that one for this. And then Vero-chan 8046, into their reply, it says, we went from Jinshi and his father in episode 3, because they talked about Jinshi and the dad and the conversation between them, the emperor. And in my reply, I was saying how we went from Jinshi and his father in episode 13 to MaoMao and her father, which is her surrogate father, and it's a totally different vibe. But there are similarities between MaoMao's real dad and the emperor and how they actually treat and act around their kids. I do think it's interesting that you have MaoMao and Jinshi, who have both been raised by not their fathers, and the way that they view their biological fathers, whether they know that they're their biological fathers or not, is very similar but different, right? Because you have Jinshi having this awkward conversation with his biological dad, who's being passed off as his brother, and he talks about competition and not being able to ever measure up to him in certain aspects. And then you have MaoMao, who wants to completely avoid her biological dad at all costs, and then has her adoptive father, who's a eunuch, and their relationship. And it's fascinating to see how similar and different MaoMao and Jinshi are in terms of that. So that part was really good, but yeah. And then as far as the book goes, chapter 11 is an interesting chapter. It's kind of a hodgepodge chapter. It talks about what technically happens after the events of chapter 10, which we talked about next week. And so part of it is the chapter itself is talking about a communist takeover, which is after the civil war in China is over. After the death of the eunuch Qin Zeshuan, which was one of Sun Yao-ting's best friends and his mentors, he goes back to the Temple of Great Bounty to stay, which is where some eunuchs are staying. And he ends up getting back in acquaintance with Wei Zhixing, who was a eunuch there that he knew previously in the book. And so he goes and visits their house a lot. And this part was kind of sad to me, but it was also kind of hopeful in a way in terms of this series and putting things in perspective. Wei Zhixing, he said that he had, when he left the palace, he went and along with him came a pretty woman who used to be a palace maid. She had waited on Duan Kang, who was the high consort, and he had been a high-ranking eunuch serving Zhishi, Longyu, and Duankang successively. A secret liaison developed between the senior eunuch and the palace maid, and he took her home after Puyi's expulsion from the Forbidden City, and they lived together like husband and wife. So there was kind of this beautiful moment where I was like, oh, so this could kind of be, if Jinshi was a eunuch, this could be how Jinshi and MaoMao could live together, because obviously traditional sex can't happen between Wei and this palace maid, but they live together in this kind of like platonic but also romantic way in which they both supported each other and stayed together. And in a world where the traditional marriage structure has value, they could conform to that in their own way, but also be their own individuals. And it talked about how she never had kids because she was a palace maid and they weren't allowed to have children. So she doesn't have any kids. He doesn't have any kids. They just live in this cohabitation and they're happy together. And I'm like, see, they talk about like, disposable income, no kids. They call them dink families in American society right now, like dink families or single income, no kids or whatever, or sinks. And I'm like, yeah, that was happening in 1930s in China. Where you had these eunuchs that were marrying these women, and they were just like living these happy lives. They didn't have kids. They were just like, here we are. We're conforming to the structure you want us to, but we're happy and we don't have to worry about any of that. And it was really sweet. But I did feel sad because Sun Yao-ting, he keeps visiting their home to see her because she's very beautiful. She's very kind. She does her own, because she was a palace maid, she does her own work. Like she cleans and cooks and does all this because that's what she was normally doing. And the eunuch, he also does the housework. So they have this very beautiful cohabitation. And Sun Yao-ting, you can tell from the writing, seems kind of not jealous of it, but he longs for it. Like he does wish he had it. Oh, it felt like he wanted a wife. It felt like he wanted the love from that palace maid that Wei was getting. And I felt for him because he doesn't get that. And it's like, oh, that sucks. But he goes back to, he ends up finally, he doesn't see them as much anymore because they kind of move away. And so he ends up getting, again, solicited by the horrible man that hired him in last week. And the guy keeps coming back, trying to get him to come back and work for him. And I'm glad Sun Yao-ting stands his ground. And he's like, no, I'm not working for you. It was terrible. I didn't like it. I'm not going back. And so we end up finding out, like the last time he sees Jia, he comes back and he's like, I'm not going to work for you. It's not a good working environment. I'm sorry. And then it says several years had passed before, many years later, he met a lawyer named Ma who had been Chin's good friend. And he said, did you know Jia Qier? And he says, of course. What did you think of him? He was a good for nothing. Well, you're quite right. He's been arrested, you know. Really, what for? Sun Yao-ting was astonished. He committed house robbery with a fake pistol. And that was the last time Sun Yao-ting heard of Jia. So it kind of talks about in that moment that Jia, he basically lost all of his money. He gambled it away, spent it on opium. And then he kept trying to like cling back to that lifestyle that he once had. And Sun Yao-ting was like, you made all these bad decisions, but I'm not going to get associated with that and fall with you. And then he ends up falling. So we talk about the Lord Guan's temple, which is where Sun Yao-ting is offered a position at. And at the temple, he ends up getting hired on, and he kind of becomes this like overseer that, because he's had all these years of experience as a eunuch, he kind of knows how to run, how things ran during Puyi's term as emperor. He knows how things run under other people. So he kind of like knows the setup and how things do work and how they don't work. He's had all this experience. So they hire him on as kind of like a consultant. And they're like, well, Sun Yao-ting, you kind of have all this experience working with all these people. You seem relatively knowledgeable. What works and what doesn't work? And so he helps out this temple kind of get back on its feet and make some executive decisions, which is really cool. And then the one really nice thing that he does is one of the eunuchs, Mr. Liu, that we've talked about in previous weeks, his wife passes away, and it's really sad. And so they were like, well, what do we do? And one thing I love about this is that in this story, all of the eunuchs know each other, and they all have this collective shared experience of having their genitals removed and going through this experience of working in the imperial palace and working for other people. So they kind of form this network and they help each other out so much. And it's so beautiful. And so this one eunuch, he's like, my wife's passed away. And they're like, well, what do we do? And they're like, she wants to be buried. She doesn't want to be cremated, but the village that they're in has no more room for burials. They have to cremate everybody because they're out of room. And so Sun Yao-ting arranges it for her coffin with Liu Ziyu's wife to be transported to Beijing, from Beijing, and carried to Landianchang. And after a few days mourning and sutra chanting, the coffin was buried on a hill. So he got to enact the last wishes of his friend's wife, and they all worked together, and it was so beautiful. I was like, oh, it like made me so emotional. I'm like, they just all worked together to get this done, and it's like the humanity of it was amazing. So the last part of chapter 11 deals with the People's Liberation Army. So the Civil War ends, and it's kind of like, as any post-war society goes through, it's like a period of reconstruction. And what do we do now that this is over? And so Sun Yat-ting kind of gets involved in it, and he goes to work for the army there in charge of grain and fodder supplies. And again, he's pretty good at delegating and managing. And so what ends up happening is there are 10 eunuchs in this village that get assigned as landlords. The Liberation Army, the PLA, they make them landlords because they have all this knowledge and management and working, and the army trusts them to handle this. They're like, well, you got nothing else better to do, so you can do this. But it's so crazy because Sun Yat-ting goes home, and his father's like, you started with nothing. Like, you were a 6-year-old kid who was castrated in our kitchen floor, and you've worked your way up to being a landlord, which make pretty good money. So he's like, you actually have found a way to sustain yourself after all this has happened. And it feels like such a moment of Sun Yat-ting, like finally he gets to be in charge of something, and he's not working for someone. He's working technically for the army, but he's the supervisor. He's not the servant. And it's such a come full circle moment that you're like, oh my gosh, he worked his way up to get to this position. And it's so good. I loved it. I was like, hell yes. So we've only got like 3 chapters left. So I'm pretty sure I will finish this book by the time we finish season 1, which it's been such a journey. And I will say there is some of the magic is lost whenever he's no longer in the palace, because the palace had this like fantasy mysticism around it, even though it was much harder and harsher. But once he leaves the palace, it's like that magic kind of fades away, and it's interesting, right? But he's doing all right. Sun Yat-ting's doing all right. So I've talked for 17 minutes, way too long. But we need to go ahead and get started and figure out and getting the episode ready here. But we're going to start episode 19. I'm so ready, y'all, of Apothecary Diaries. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's a go. Oh my God! Oh, was this the best episode of the season so far? I think it might be. Oh my God! Woo! I don't know if it was the best in terms of animation. I don't know if it was the best in terms of symbolism. I don't know if it was the best in terms of themes, but did it make me be there like, oh my God, how are we going to stop Jinchi from getting killed? This is why I love shows like Apothecary Diaries. I love a mystery show that it builds and builds and builds, and then suddenly it clicks and you're like, oh, wait, no, this is what's going to happen. And you got to hurry up and go and solve the mystery and figure it out. And it's like, I think the last time I felt a rush like that, being like, hurry up and get there, is when I saw Saw 2, which is like one of the only horror movies. I've not seen past Saw 2. Saw 1 and Saw 2 are like 2 of the only horror movies that I was like, okay, I can get behind this, because there's a lot of psychological thrilling and detective work that you have to do in those 2 movies. I haven't watched past that, but in Saw 2, there's a build-up moment like this, only there's a twist, and then you're like, shit, what? But that's another story. But this, now, you may be thinking that, oh, Romania, we've figured it all out, but no, this episode has actually complicated a lot of things for me. And the moment that the ED was done, I was like, oh my God, we need to talk about this, because things are not so simple or so black and white or so. There's other things at work, and I kind of am fascinated about it, especially with Locken and his character. His character's actions have made me completely rethink his character a little bit, where I was like, wait a minute, why did you show up? Why are you here doing this if this was all your plan? I don't think it is. So we're going to run through some theories. I hope you're ready for Romania and Whiteboard Coon to do some theorizing, because that's what we're going to do. So we're going to talk about options of all this and how this whole plan and the plan comes together. I don't think they have like a Joker Dark Knight scenario where like, I'm not a guy with a plan. No, I think somebody has a plan. And I think that plan was foiled, but I think the people that I thought was involved with the plan might not be connected in ways that I thought they were connected. So we're just going to have to see about that and go through the options and the theories and talk about it. And I hope you all are ready. But yeah, so, okay, let's run through this episode because there's a lot of really good things to do with this episode. And talking about, okay, there's a medium ceremony in the afternoon. So this whole idea of the ceremony itself. So we'll talk about the ceremony. That the ceremony is just, they need a medium. And that for today is going to be Jinshi as part of his duties. So this is well known. So I did look up, all I looked up was to try to find some stuff about ceremonies. Now, again, this series is loosely based on a lot of, it's kind of like Yona of the Dawn, that series, which I love. It's like an amalgamation of just various cultures, various things. It's not really, that's why they have the disclaimer at the beginning, because they're like, this isn't really drawing from one in particular. You could probably pinpoint influences, but it's not drawing from one necessarily over another. It's just a combination of cultures and things like that. Don't read too much into it, basically, which I did at the very beginning. So, but I did look up from Imperial Harvest, this website. They talked about imperial rites and rituals. And it says, and I quote, "Rites play an important role. They help maintain cosmic order and align the forces of heaven, earth, and humanity. They maintain balance of chi between worshippers and the god, between ancestors and descendants. As is the Confucian tradition, a meticulous observance of protocol is of the utmost importance." And they had a picture image here that was shown that kind of looks exactly like the temple and the scenario where there's all the eunuchs and all the guards and stuff all present. So it felt very, once I saw this picture, I was like, that feels very similar to what we saw in this episode. So it makes sense that they have all these rites performed, all of these rituals performed. It's part of keeping balance. Makes sense. So it says there are 5 types of rites prescribed by the ancient rites of Zhao. Auspicious rites, or offerings to heaven, earth, and spirits. Inauspicious rites, which are funerals and crop failures. Celebratory rites, which are weddings and banquets. Hosting rites, which are receiving audiences at the royal court. And military rites, declaring war, dispatching armies, and triumphant returns. Auspicious rites were the most important, considered great affairs of the state, and were performed solely by the Chinese emperor as his role as the son of heaven. To fulfill his responsibilities, the emperor conducted 3 ceremonies every year at the Temple of Heaven. On the first Jin day stem of the first lunar month, he would pray for an abundant harvest in the Hall of Prayer. On the summer solstice, the emperor would pray for rain at the circular mound altar. But the most important ceremony was the worship of heaven, held on winter solstice. This was to thank heaven for the good harvest for that year. It was believed that even the smallest mistake would bring bad luck to the empire, so everything had to be perfect. Now, we don't exactly know what rite or ritual is happening during this. I'm gonna guess that this entire thing was probably something that was like, I don't know if it was inauspicious or if it was hosting rites, or it could have been a hosting rites ceremony because the new consort came in. Could have been something like that. We don't exactly know what type of rite or ceremony it was. What we do know is that Jinshi was the one that was assigned to perform it. And given that he is the emperor's son / brother, it makes sense why he was the one to do it, because he's of nobility. He has to be the one performing the ceremony. You're related to the emperor, so there's that noble blood there, that purity there. So sure, makes sense why he has this duty. Seems like the emperor pushes a lot of duties off onto his brother / son that, we could talk about, but Jinshi seems to handle it all in stride because that's how he's able to get whatever he wants right now. He's like, fine, I'll do this mediocre job if that's what it means. He's like, yeah. But so Jinshi has been assigned for this part of it, which seems like a normal setup. Could have also been something that was expected. So if his job requires him to perform in these ceremonies, then yeah, anybody that was conspiring to kill the emperor's brother / son would know that Jinshi's going to be in charge of this. So that's strike number 1. So someone knew, so we put over here, someone knew that Jinshi would be involved. And honestly, as far as the people that knew Jinshi would be involved, that would be anyone that knew his lineage. Well, as we established the last couple episodes, apparently not everybody knows Jinshi's lineage. Or at least knows exactly what he is. Now, all them damn eunuchs seem to know, and all the military men seem to know, but apparently not everybody knows. So obviously Locken has come to that conclusion and has figured it out. But what makes it interesting is if we're going to put Locken over here, Locken, he knows the lineage, and he was confirming it. But it could just be, here's the thing, Locken, I'm not saying Locken is a great person. Locken has a lot of flaws and a lot of problems, and MaoMao kind of hates him, and I don't blame her for hating him because he's kind of a terrible person. But I also wonder in this if he's kind of also a red herring. If I feel like maybe Locken in part of this is a test for MaoMao to be like, okay, Loman has told you not conjecture, but hardcore evidence. And just because you hate Locken and he is a terrible person, does that mean he's responsible for an assassination attempt? Or is he trying to figure it out just like she is? I feel like after this episode that Locken has been trying to piece together what's been going on. Now, he seems to be someone that just says things without worry about conjecture. So why didn't he say, hey, Jinshi, there's a possible assassination attempt on your life? That's a big question. And that's something that we probably need answers to. But, you know, Locken also seems like someone that he is kind of like MaoMao in that he's trying to do detective work. We'll talk more about him as we go through this episode. And maybe he was trying to gather his own evidence and piece things together. He's just very slimy about it, which is not how MaoMao is about it. But anyway, so whoever plotted this knew that Jinshi was going to be involved. Knew he was going to be involved in the ceremony. So that was the main setup. They knew the ceremony was going to occur. Jinshi was going to give the rites. So also what is clear is that this has been set up for a while. This is not something that just happened. This is something that has been in the works for quite some time, which is very scary, right? So meanwhile, Jinshi is not, thinking about any of this. He's worried about how MaoMao reacted when he brought up Locken, and he feels bad because he knows how sad she is and how upset it made her, and he kind of feels bad for bringing it up, and he's like, well, shit. He's like, have I struck a nerve? Is she gonna be mad at me? Meanwhile, Gaoshen's like, hey, don't forget what you gotta do. Gaoshen's like, look, I know what's on your mind, man. I feel for you, sir. But you can't forget that you got a job to do. You can't be thinking about romance while you're at work. And Jinshi's like, okay, I know. So, which we'll come back to that. Meanwhile, I honestly love the friendship that has developed between Lee Haku and MaoMao. Because honestly, whenever we first started this series and Lee Haku was introduced, I was a little worried because I was like, I don't want Lee Haku. I mean, he's a strong golden retriever of a man who's got a really good aesthetically pleasing body. He could be a threat to Jinshi in his pursuit of MaoMao. But what I like is that they've become like platonic friends. He's after Peyton. He's after a tall, busty woman. He views MaoMao as a little short girl. I'm like, she's just a gremlin. Leave her alone. But he goes to her. I love that he immediately goes to her when he's like worried about the mystery deepening. He's like, I'm going to go to MaoMao. She's going to help solve the problem. And I love that. I love that he's relying on her. So we find out about the fire in the warehouse and that it was a distraction for someone to break into the warehouse and take advantage of the chaos and steal some ceremonial tools. So she's like alluding, well, what got stolen? So here's my thing. Do I think that there's definitely some stuff at work here, and I can't decide. We're gonna have to wait till the end of the season. I can't decide if this was all part of it or if Locken set this whole damn thing up to try to see if MaoMao was indeed his daughter and could figure it out more than him. Because here's the thing. Locken knows that the only person who has ever outwitted him was MaoMao's mom. The only person that has ever outwitted him was MaoMao's mother. So by Locken's biological conjecture, he's like, well, if the only person that could outsmart me was this woman, then our child shall surely be the one to outsmart me and can figure it out before me. That's my thought. I feel like this entire thing, if it wasn't set up to be part of the whole incident, was set up to test MaoMao and see if she could figure it out before him and could help figure it out alongside him, is what I think. So I'm like, has he been trying to like play detective along with MaoMao, but he's too ashamed of the fact that he's a terrible person to come forward and tell her, be like, hey, I've been trying to figure this out just like you, but he knows that she hates him and she rightfully hates him, and he's too much of a terrible person to like, he knows he's terrible, and he's like, I can't deny the allegations. So I don't know. I feel like Locken is maybe, I mean, Locken's complicated and I like that in a character, but so maybe he was trying to test MaoMao to see if she could figure it out. If she could figure out what he couldn't figure out. Maybe. Or put that together. Because so what we have in this situation is that there was a warehouse fire. Now here's where I'm going to back up and hopefully y'all can hear me. So here's where it gets complicated. There was the warehouse fire. The warehouse fire was caused by Suiren. Or Suire. I'm going to confuse Suiren and Suire forever. But it was caused by Suire, who had the pipe, right? And then later on, Locken noticed the pipe when he came there to investigate before or after MaoMao. Now, the pipe was left, so maybe he was seeing if MaoMao could pick it up and make the same conclusions that he had. We don't know. But Suire gave the pipe so they could start the warehouse fire. And meanwhile, while the warehouse fire is going on, there were some ceremonial tools that were stolen. Okay. Ceremonial tools were stolen while this fire was going on. So this was clearly, the question is, did Suire steal them? We don't know. We don't know if Suire, I thought Suire was aligned with Locken this entire time, but I could be wrong. I thought she was related to Locken. I could be wrong. So we don't know yet. But he gets MaoMao to go over there because he thinks that it's something that should be discussed in private. And he talks about how the ceremonial tools, and not just one, were stolen. And she's like, well, were they being managed that haphazardly? He's like, well, I don't know. And then he's like, no knowledgeable managers. There's no knowledgeable managers right now about it. That one passed away last year, and the current manager that would know the basics, he's been poisoned and is in a coma. So here's our other thing, is that meanwhile, in this, Suire, I believe Suire is the one that has poisoned the one manager who's in the coma and then killed the other that knew Jinshi. So the plot thickens because the two people, the one person that would be able to know that something was going on and probably knew about the faulty construction of the temple maybe, and could have warned Jinshi like, hey, you need to do something about this. I feel like he's dead. And so they knew that he knew Jinshi and they had to kill him off so he couldn't tell him. Well, and then the other manager that might have noticed something was wrong, he was poisoned too. So I think that Suire is a dead woman. Is basically the end of this. Because no matter what ends up happening, Suire is involved in the murder and poisoning, in my mind, of two people. And that's enough. But if you tie in the fact that it could have led to the near assassination attempt of the emperor's kin, you dead. You dead woman. Dead woman walking. And maybe that ties to the fact that she was joking darkly up on the hill about trying to find an herb that would resurrect the dead because she knows she's a dead woman. She knows she's a dead woman walking and it's only a matter of time until she's exposed. And maybe back when she was going back and forth from the medicine shop and we saw Locken watching her from a distance, we thought that he was watching MaoMao, but maybe he was watching Suire the entire time and was trying to catch on to her. So I've been thinking this entire time that Suire and Locken have been connected, but in fact, the connection may be that they're not working together, but that he's trying to get onto her to figure out her connection with whoever's trying to kill Jinshi. Maybe we'll just have to wait and see. Because I'm like, the ceremonial tools seems like a distraction. Or the ceremonial tools seems like Locken trying to get MaoMao to connect the dots that, because, Locken can't just walk over to MaoMao and say, hey, I know you're friends with Jinshi. There's going to be an assassination attempt on his life if you can put in a good word and stop it. He can't just do that, right? One, he knows she hates him. And two, it's like, it's not going to work. But also, I guess he can't just tell Jinshi there's going to be an assassination attempt because he doesn't have any proof. And also, Jinshi doesn't like him. So Jinshi might be like, what are you talking about? And go through with it anyway. So we'll get back to Locken. But I feel like the ceremonial tools being stolen, they don't seem to connect at all to the assassination attempt because it wasn't the ceremonial tools that were the cause of the assassination. It was the faulty wiring that was already in place from long before the tools were stolen. So, but we're going to talk about that. We're going to keep going through this and see if we get anything else. So MaoMao's like, I know who this person was. So they're like, they haven't come back to work. And he's like, how did you know? And she's like, well, I like these. Like, how do you know what's going on? She's like, oh, well, a lot has happened. So we get back to the aftermath of the fire. She's trying to figure out, and she connects the dots of who's passed away, which is, she's like, was it Conan by chance? He's like, yeah, that's it. How'd you know? And she's like, a lot happened. And so she's like, well, what can I do? What can I say that's not conjecture? And he's like, so the main point is you gave this back to me, and it's from the fire. I tried to give it back, but the owner declined it and says he doesn't want it anymore. Now, the pipe was super expensive. So the question is, where did the pipe come from? I thought for a second it might be Locken's, but I don't think it is. The question is, did Sweeren get the pipe? One instance is, who's been, surprisingly absent from all of this story that showed up at the beginning of the second cour that's just mysteriously vanished like you do in detective novels to avoid suspicion? Lolan. So did the pipe come from Lolan and her people? Does Lolan know Sweeren? Are they secret lovers? Is this a doomed Yuri in disguise? I don't know. But, I mean, nobody's claiming the pipe. Locken's not claiming the pipe. Nobody's claiming the pipe. And it seems rather expensive. So where'd it come from? And they said the court lady. And he's like, sounds weird, right? And she's like, well... And honestly, this is the point where your height kind of gives yourself away. Because he says a tall woman that smells like medicine. I mean, there's not a lot of tall women in this court that smell like medicine other than Lolan. And he's like, I know it's not you because of your height. And I'm like, oh my God. She's like, thanks. Glad you don't suspect me for murder. But she goes back to Loman telling her, just because you have conjecture doesn't always mean you can, frame someone. And here's the thing. I think at the end of the day, MaoMao was fine with going after and saving Jinshi, who we'll talk about. She didn't even know it was Jinshi, supposedly. Oh my God. But she was okay going after it because her using conjecture to save someone is different than using conjecture to condemn someone. There is a distinct difference there because it's like, if you have a theory and it could possibly save someone's life, well then, yeah, you need to act on that theory because if you don't, someone could die. But conversely, if you act on a theory and you don't have proof and it could cause someone to die, then that's a whole different story. So there's this difference here with conjecture. And if we look at MaoMao, she's okay if it's going to save a life. We can act on that conjecture. If it's going to save a life, yep, let's do it. We'll worry about the consequences later. Let's first save this person and then go from there. But if it's going to cost a life, then MaoMao's like, nope, I'm not going to be responsible for that. And maybe Locken was thinking the same thing. Maybe Locken was like, here's my thing though. I feel like at the end of the day, Locken is not going to take the risk. No matter what. And that's why he didn't get involved further than he did. Because at the end of the day, Locken's like, I'm not going to be responsible or have part in someone dying, but I'm also not going to be part of saving someone if there's no benefit to me. Again, I think Locken is a slimy person and not a nice person, but at the end of the day, I don't think he's responsible for this. It's just he didn't want to get too involved. But then when MaoMao was hit, that's when he got involved. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So he's like, do you think that there's something that we can find out? And that's when she does the Venn diagram showing that these three situations could all be connected. So we could look at this. I'm going to back up again. We could look at this and say that we have the Jinshi assassination that's here. Then we have possibly the poisoning and the stealing of goods. Possibly. And then we have Locken trying to get back with MaoMao, and all of these are connecting together. Or if we're thinking the pure consort's involved, then we could put her down here. So all these three things, Suiren is in the middle of all this, which to me does not bode well for Sui Ray, Sui Ray does not bode well for her. Girl, regardless of the outcome of all this, you in danger, girl, because you're going to be caught up in all this. Yeah. She's like, and I like that she's like, I just want to give Lee Haku enough information that he can make his own assumptions, but I don't want to be tied to this. And Lee Haku is he's such a golden retriever. He's like, oh my gosh, thank you, MaoMao. That's so nice of you. You're so smart. I love it. And then I love that he like puts his grip on her and she's like, sir, you are really strong. You know, I like that MaoMao has such mental fortitude and she is a hardworking girl, but at the end of the day, she's this tiny little girl. She's like, you're really strong, sir. You're actually hurting me. And then, oh my God, my day was made like 7 minutes into this video with the moment that they look over and they hear this like heavy breathing. They make this heavy breathing. Now, Lee Haku immediately takes his hands away because then we see he's like, looks like fun. Oh my God, Jinshi's like Hua Chang from Heaven Official's Blessing. He's like having fun over there with my wife. With my future wife. Oh my God. I love that Jinshi, he's getting left out. And so he's not only is he getting left out and he's mad that someone else is able to have fun with MaoMao and it's not him, but he's jealous because Lee Haku's able to get close to her and he's just like, why can't it be me? Oh my God. And he just looks so pitiful. He looks so pitiful. I love him so much. I love Jinshi to pieces. He's like, well, that looks like fun. She's like, what the fudge? MaoMao's like, I have no clue what's going on. She's like, there's nothing fun here. She's like, we're trying to solve a murder. Like, there's nothing fun here. Now, immediately, Lee Haku's like, bye, I'm going to leave. And he immediately gets out of there. And MaoMao's like, why did he walk away? Lee Haku knows. Lee Haku knows that Jinshi is the Emperor's brother, and is like, oh, no. I know that you have an affinity for this girl. Bye. I've heard the rumors. Not getting involved. It's okay. I don't want to be, and immediately leaves. None of these men are going to mess with MaoMao because they know Jinshi has an interest. And she's like, what the heck was that about? So anyway, they go back and Jinshi, of course, I like Jinshi is a little bit jealous, which poor Jinshi, he should know by now that MaoMao is not interested, but he still can't help it. He's like, well, you seem really close to him. And he's also the one that gave MaoMao the pin to leave the first time. So of course he thinks that. And she's like, well, he just comes to talk to me with his concerns. It's fine. She's like, why are you bothered? And he's like, well, okay, fine. Be that way. So then she's like, I can't say for certain this has nothing to do with Master Jinshi. So in the back of her mind, she knew that it could have something to do with Jinshi. Do I believe in the moment that she didn't realize the person in danger was Jinshi? I do believe that. I think that she had an inkling that he could be involved. Do I think that she really genuinely thought that he was the one in that temple when she went to save him? No, I think that it was in the back of her mind, but in that moment, she was more concerned about the fact that someone was in danger. Someone's life was at stake, and she decided to act on it. I think she was more concerned with that than the possibility that it was actually Jinshi and she was doing this for Jinshi, which does it take away a little bit from the romance? Maybe, but that's more in line with her character. Now, Jinshi, on the other hand, Jinshi is the romantic. Jinshi is the damsel in distress in this episode, but he is the romantic idealist. She is the pragmatic person. It's so funny because we talk about like gender roles in shonen and shoujo and things like that. In the shonen, MaoMao would be the heroic male character in typical shonen that would be like saving a person, not because they're in love with them, because it's the right thing to do. And Jinshi would be the stereotypical girl character that's like, oh, but you love me and all this. Like their roles are reversed. And I love that because it's fun to see it from a different perspective. And so she's like, well, let me explain the details of what's going on. And so then he listens. He's like, okay. And he's like, I don't know how these things are related. It's like setting several traps in hopes that some of them work out. So that's exactly what this kind of feels like. This feels like a series of traps with the hopes that one of them works. Which is a bold move, Cotton, because it's like, if you've watched true crime or anything like that, like the more complicated you make things, the more likely there is to be a flaw, or the more likely there is to be a hole, or the more likely there is to be some mistake made that gets you caught. But if the person's just setting up an elaborate set of traps and hoping that a mouse steps in one of them, then... But I feel like at the same time, with the series of traps, I feel like Locken was also setting up a series of tests to see if MaoMao was going to be able to figure one of them out, and to try to set up to see if she could come to the conclusion that he wanted her to help figure out what was going on. It feels very much like a game of shogi or a game of Go. You have all these different strategies and you're just trying to pull off and see whichever one is going to work against your opponent. So anyway, he's like, well, do you think there are other traps? And I like that poor pile of paper he has beside him. It's so awful. She's like, well, I can't say for certain. She's like, I don't know for sure yet. She's like, it's hard to determine which are accidents and which were plotted. She's like, it's, you know, it's possible these are all just coincidences. She's like, I can't say for certain. And I love that he looks over at her like, well, aren't you excited about this? And she's like, excited? She's like, no, not particularly. She's like, I just do what I'm told. I'm just a servant. And at that point I was like, well, there's no poison involved. There's no incentive for her to get the case solved. And plus, I don't know if it's the fact that Jinshi could possibly be involved and she doesn't know what to do with that information, that she's like, I don't know. Or it could be the fact that she doesn't know. It could also be the fact that she has a lot of opinions about what the problem is, but she doesn't want to say those opinions because she doesn't, again, conjecture, she doesn't have the evidence. So she's like, I'm just kind of at a wall here. So then Jinshi's like, oh, indeed. He's like, so you're not excited about this case. And I love that Gao Shun's like, oh my God, sir, don't do it. And he's like, and I love that he's like, I figured out a way to get you excited about what's about to happen. And he starts to draw this. I love that he holds his sleeve when he draws. It's great. He's like, the other day I visited the trader. Now, has he been visiting the trader to try to get incentive items to get MaoMao to help do detective work? Of course. He's like, and there's an interesting item in stock. I love that Gao Shun is instantly like, oh my God, no. He's like, sir, don't do this. And so it's an ox Bazor. I knew what a Bazor was because of Harry Potter, because that's an item that's in there. But he's like, a Bazor. And she's immediately, he's like, look what I got, girl. He's like, look what I found. The suspense. And it's basically a gallstone from a cow, which is pretty rare to find. He's like, it's only found in 1 of 1,000 cows. Yeah, not a lot of cows. I'm sure cows do get gallstones more frequently than you would imagine. But what are the odds of you finding one unless you do like an autopsy? And why are you doing an autopsy on a cow? So unless you're getting it butchered, which here's agricultural fact of the day. I don't know how it was in ancient China. I don't know. But agricultural fact of the day. When most of the cows in the U.S., I don't know how it is for other countries, but in the U.S., most of the beef that you eat are castrated bulls. They're steers. So you're eating eunuchs, basically, in the cattle world. Most of the time, I would say probably 80 to 90% of the beef that you eat is probably steers. They've been castrated bulls because you don't want testosterone in the meat because it makes it really tough and unappealing or unappetizing. So most of it are just like bull calves that were snipped as calves, fatten them out, go. Now, occasionally, Like, for example, my family had a cow that she had eye cancer, which really sucked, but she lost both of her eyes. She didn't live long after that. My parents were like, she's not going to get anything at the sale barn, and there's no point in selling her to someone there and putting that burden on them. Plus, she was a cow. Her name was Maggie, and we'd had her forever. And I was like, So my family's like, we could have her processed and made into hamburger. She was like 10 years old. They're like, that's about all she's good for at this point. Otherwise, we're just going to have to put her out of her misery and go. Because she was not living a fulfilling life at that point. And so I was like, okay. I said, fine, you can make her in a hamburger. Just don't tell me when we eat her. They were like, okay, fair. So that's what we did. And so that does happen. There are cows that are processed, but it is much more rare than having a steer. So yeah, I can understand the gallstone and all that being a rare item. And she's like, you're going to give me that? And then, okay, the way she said, are you going to give me that? As she climbed up onto the desk in front of him, you could interpret that phrase a lot differently. And she's like, really? And the way that her eyes are like lit up, she's like, this is a rare medicinal item. She's like, you better not be lying. And the way she is not prepared for her to be on top of a desk of him. He was just like, oh, no, wait. I wasn't ready. I haven't prepared myself. I love it. I love every moment about this scene. Every single freaking moment about it. I love it because he was not prepared. And he's like, oh my God. Like Jinshi was not ready for MaoMao to be topping over him at all. He was like, do you want it? And she's like, I do. And I love in that moment that Gao Shun is like, down girl. Like MaoMao's like, you have no idea what this is. Jinshi's going to be dreaming about this later. Jinshi's going to be dreaming about a lot of things later after this episode. But he was like, you need to back down from him. It's okay. I freaking love this scene so much. It's so good. It's great. But yeah, and she's like, oh yes, I should be, yeah. There was just something inherently hilarious, potentially sexual about it. And she's like, sorry about that. And he's like, ha ha ha. And she's like, don't mind me. It's fine. Jinshi is not prepared for her. We are lucky as a collective audience that MaoMao is not a sexual being because we would not be prepared. We would not be. Jinshi would combust into a puff of smoke. Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, you do well, and I'll keep you updated on that little bazaar. And she's like, as you wish, Master Jinshi. And she's so excited about getting this damn gallstone. And he's like, so, Gao Shun, take care of it. And Gao Shun's like, I hate both of you. Every second of this, I cannot. He's like, I'm stuck with these two teenagers who are in love, and they don't realize it, and my life is awful. Gao Shun likes it. He just doesn't want to admit it. Oh my God. So yeah, so she's researching, and then we find out dear sweet librarian man who talks about the ceremonies, and she's like, I want to write this out and deal with it. And she's like, the food poisoned official and Master Conan were both related to ceremonies. So she's like, if the incident with the pipe was a way to steal ceremonial tools, well, how is that connected? And so she's like, how are these incidents? She's like, they are all disguised as coincidences. They need to line up to form an intentional incident somewhere. Someone went through the trouble to steal ceremonial tools. So it has to be a ceremony of some importance. A medium, it says medium or higher, which maybe the medium is dealing with like the level of importance. She's like, I need to find out when all the ceremonies take place. She's like, Mr. Jinshi did purify himself often. Is he involved in the ceremonies? And so then the librarian shows back up and he's like, hey, he's like, I used to work for this place, but then I got demoted, which the demotion seems rather suspicious that there was the demotion of this guy because he knew too much. The man who knew too much, he was demoted so he couldn't tell any more secrets. Mm-hmm. The altar of the sapphire sky. It is a beautiful building. He says there's a large pillar hanging from the ceiling. And that's when he talks about the problem with the pillar. Now, this part I wanted to go back to because he says there are banners hanging above the central altar on the pillar. And he says they lower the pillar to add festive texts every time. So the ceremonies happen quite a bit, right? And she's like, well, you know a lot. And he says, well, I used to be, before I got assigned to this archive, he's like, I used to be on the board of rights, but then he's like, I talked back to my superiors and I got demoted. Imagine that. I mean, just the chain of events that led him to be here. He's like, I used to worry about the build strength, but I'm glad that it's fine. And she's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, well, the pillar is hanging from the ceiling like this. Okay, so then we see that the thing holding the pillar, right? He says, it's so big, I was worried about it falling down. And I voiced my concerns about the part's strength, and that's what got me sent to this place in the first place. So he tried to speak up about the part being dangerous, and he got sent away. Imagine that. And she's like, well, that's scary. She's like, what if the pillar fell on somebody? If the metal part fixing the pillar broke and the pillar fell. And notice there's like 3 cables connecting to the pillar, which is like the 3 suns in the lead episode. I'm so glad the lead episode is connecting back to this. That's so great. She's like, if the pillar fell, it could probably kill the person directly underneath. Imagine that. Someone of noble birth could be lost. Imagine that. And maybe she just thought it was somebody of noble birth and not Jinshi. And she's like, oh, they could die and this could be really bad. But yeah, she's like, the strength issue. And then she's like, what was stolen? What was the stolen ceremonial tool anyway? And so if it was something so important, well, surely they would make a new one. And that's when she thinks back to the 3 men who were making a new one, who was working on it. So now the question is, with the new tool, they said that the dad died. Was the dad killed, or did he die mysteriously in an accident or just of old age? But he died, so then that left the 3 brothers to making the new tool. Now, here's where Locken could come in a positive way, because if the ceremonial tools were stolen, okay, so here's the thing, if they were working on new ceremony, there's multiple possibilities, but I'm thinking of 2 specifically. Maybe the 3 brothers were working on new ceremonial tools that would be used to fix the altar pillar, that would be used to not let Jinshi die. And Suirei or whoever else stole the ceremonial tools so that that didn't happen. If that were the case, then that would kind of make Locken actually not a bad guy in this scenario, because he was trying to get MaoMao to get the 3 of them back together. Now, why he didn't do this himself, he's a slimy, complicated character. You tell me. But that could be a possibility. Or Locken was just setting up MaoMao to figure out the situation with the brothers, because that would give her knowledge that she could use later on to figure out the assassination attempt and put everything together. Again, why he isn't doing this himself? But we've also established that Locken is the type of character who's a coward, because he couldn't just confess, save up the money, and buy out MaoMao's mom. No, instead he resulted to the much more slimy and horrible solution of getting her pregnant instead. So then he didn't have to waste his money, but still didn't get her to go with the other men. So it seems in character for Locken that all this is working out the way that it does, but still, it's all connecting. And that's when she's like, when's the next ceremony? And he's like, oh, today. And she's like, shit. And she's like, there's a plan that has been concocted over a long period of time, and it's finally all connected. She's like, it's just conjecture, but if I let somebody die. And so then there's all of the eunuchs, all of the people, I'm assuming they're all eunuchs, all the men there. And she goes up to these guards and is like, hey, I got to go in this beautiful temple here and stop this assassination attempt. Now, do I think that she really thought that this man was connected with the events? But she wanted to cause a commotion to stop the ceremony. So when she was like, hey, I got to get in. And he's like, well, you're just a servant, girl. I'm not going to let you do that. And she's like, if I don't get in there, somebody's going to die. And she's like, their lives at risk. And he's like, well, and I love that he's like, well, that's not your decision. Put something in the suggestion box. And I'm like, oh my God. Connecting with real world situations. Like whenever there's an emergency, people are like, well, just go complain over there. And it's like, you do not see the problem. So yeah, definitely a nice little fourth wall break there. But she's like, a fatal defect was discovered in the altar. And she's like, there's a reason to suspect somebody has tampered with it. And she's like, if you don't let me in, you're going to regret it. And she's like, if you still reject me after listening to my warnings, you could be, part of the assassination attempt, which after this episode, that guard's probably gone. I'm just saying, I don't know if Jinshi would be cold-hearted to get rid of him himself, but the Emperor or Locken probably would be. That guy seemed terrified of Locken, so I'm sure he knew he was screwed the moment Locken showed up. So she's like, well, that's what it is. And I think she tries to do this part here out of desperation, being like, because MaoMao is usually very, very, very calculating, and she tries to measure what she says and doesn't say so that she doesn't get hurt. But I think in this moment, she was trying to cause a fuss so that there would be something to hopefully stop the ceremony. She just didn't probably expect to get clocked in the face by a club. Oh my God. Because she blames him. And we also kind of see the result of, if you do use conjecture and you don't have evidence, it can come back to bite you or club you in the face, as it does here, which is absolutely terrifying. And I felt more bad for MaoMao with the leg incident later on, but the club to the face was terrible. And all the men are like, oh my God, you bitch. Like, how dare you? Like, they're all like, what the fudge? But our poor girl, now when she lands there and her eyes look kind of out of focus, she looks a lot like Locken. The eyes don't have the light in them. It's a lot like his. And she's like, I intentionally did that, so that's fine. But it's not a big enough commotion. So she was willing to hurt herself to try to get the ceremony stopped, which is in character for MaoMao. But Jinshi will probably be like, why did you do that? And then as she's sitting there about to lose consciousness, she's like, well, do you feel better? And he's getting held back there. And she tries to move forward. And she's like, there's a person of the most noble birth inside, isn't there? That's why you're all guarding it. And then she's like, if something happens, you'll all be the ones to lose your heads. So let me go and be the only one for it to happen. Like, I love she stands up to this guard and she's like, look, if you let him die, it's all on you. But instead, just let me go. She's let me just say that a rat got in accidentally. I hate that she calls herself that. But of course, it could connect to Locken, who probably thinks that he's a rat too, for good reason. And she's like, then I'll be the only one to get beheaded. Now, in that moment, she's like, why? He's like, why should I trust the words of a girl like you? And Locken's like, what about me? Now, here's the thing. Locken showing up, if Locken really wanted Jinshi to be assassinated, there is no reason for him to show up. Because all he had to do was sit back and let it happen. Because he knew that MaoMao wasn't going to get in there. So the only two options are, one, he showed up to get MaoMao off the hook so that the assassination could still happen, but she wouldn't get in trouble. Maybe he did want Jinshi to be assassinated, but he didn't want MaoMao to get involved too much. So he's like, well, I'll just show up at the last minute if it looks like she's in trouble, and we'll let the assassination attempt go, but we'll let her be safe, and we'll just go from there. But with that being said, if he really wanted the assassination attempt to happen, then he would have had her held back a little bit longer until it did happen, right? So I feel like him showing up shows us, the reader, that he is not directly involved in the assassination attempt, but he knows what's going on, right? He knows something's going on. And the moment he shows up, MaoMao's like, son of a bitch. She's like, nope, I don't want him here. I'm like, of all people to show up, the last person I want is this man. That's my dad. No, thank you. She's like, why? I hate him. And also, it could also be either he doesn't want MaoMao hurt, but he's too much of a coward to come straight forward, or he wants MaoMao in his debt so that she'll have to come to him, because he'll be like, well, I saved your life, so now you have to come back to me. And that could be part of it too, right? But I don't think that he intended for Jinshi to be assassinated. He might have known about it, and wasn't doing a lot to prevent it. But when MaoMao got involved, he's like, fine, I'll step in and do something. And they all know Locken, and he's connected with the military. So they're like, well, shit. And the fact that he stands there, he's like, now, why would you strike a young girl like that? Mm-hmm. And they're all like, oh, well, and the fact that he says she's hurt. Now, he has the exact, by like same expression as her. Like, there ain't no beating the allegations at this point. There is no beating the allegations that is her dad. Nope, you cannot convince me otherwise. Yeah. Now, was he mad that she was hurt? Could be. But they're definitely the same. And he's like, well, shit. And he's like, well, at any rate, why don't you go ahead and do as the girl says? Now, at that point, when he says, why don't you just go ahead and do it? He's like, I'll take responsibility. And she's like, I don't want to be she's like, I don't want to be responsible for paying a debt to him. I don't want him involved. I think him saying, let me take responsibility and do as she says, he expected her to just stand there and not get involved, and thought that would just be the end of it. They'd go stop the ceremony and that would be all. But that doesn't end up happening. She's like, I don't even want to see who's behind me. It's perfect timing, as if it was all planned. And she's like, I can't. So she's like, did he plan this whole thing so that he could get me in his debt? Possibly. And she's like, I'm not. She's like, it doesn't matter who this voice belongs to. And then she takes off. Now, Locken doesn't stop her or even try to. So maybe he thought, and it could be that he thought she'd go in there and Jinshi would be dead. Maybe he thought she'd go in there and it'd be too late, and was just thinking, well, she'll go in there and then see him dead, and then that's one less person to worry about, and then I'll take care of her after that. Maybe that's what he thought. Maybe that was his plan. We don't know. But regardless of what the case may have been, she goes in there because he didn't chase after her. So I think what he thought was that she was going after that and she wasn't going to make it in time and she was going to be fine. But what did she say there when she walks in? She's like, she goes in and says, I must look terrible, but I'll ask Mr. Gaoshun after all this is done and take a nice long bath. She's like, I'll just ask Gaoshun about this, take a bath, and it'll be done. But yeah, she's like, but first I have to stop the ceremony and avoid getting beheaded. She's like, I have to prevent this person from getting killed. And there's Jinshi. And she runs up there. And Jinshi doesn't even know what's going on until she jumps out and saves him. Oh my God. And yeah, you see like the whole thing falling and it clips her leg as she goes. Oh my God. Of course she lands right in his lap. Is her head in a compromising position? Yes, it is, but we're not going to focus on that. Don't worry about that. And then, yeah, she's like, I made it. Of course she's hurt. And then, oh my God, the part that got me was like her leg, like, has like the gash in it where it's bleeding. And I was like, Jinshi, can you not put a tourniquet around that shit to keep it from bleeding out? That'd be great if you could. But of course she looks up and Jinshi's like, what the fudge is happening? Because Jinshi, like, this is his nightmare to see this girl that he likes absolutely brutal. And then she's like, oh, it's you. So she didn't even know it was him. Or maybe she suspected it but wasn't sure. And she's like, can I have the Bezor now? And him, like, putting his hand on her face. Everybody in that room is like, oh, they know. And he's like, there's not time for that. Like, oh my God. There's so much romance in this one scene. I'm taking so many screenshots. He's like, what happened to your face? He's like, who did this to you? And it's like, And his face, like how concerned he looks for her. When his hair is up, he does look a little bit more masculine and have a little bit more of the emperor in him. But, oh my God. And she's like, why are you she's like, my face hurts. Why are you clutching it like this? And that's when she's like, why? Because then it almost seems like she was in a daze. Because at first she's like, can I have my Bezor now? But then she's like, wait, why are you here? So like her mind is just all over the place in this moment, which she probably got a concussion. So, you know. And then of course, him looking that concerned, shut the frick up. shut the frick up. She's like, what's that look on his face? Like, he just looks so sad in that moment. Now, he is the emperor's son, brother, so he can't show that emotion when he walks out of there with her. He cannot show how much he is feeling for her in that moment, because that's not proper and that's not appropriate for who he is. But the look of concern he has on his face for her, she's the only one that gets to see that. And I'm like, oh shit. And so then she like starts to pass. She's like, I need to stitch up my leg. And then she passes out, and he's like, and he tries to like make it to where she won't like, he's like, hey, wake up. Like, he looks so concerned in that moment for her. And then she just passes out. And then Jinshi is like, well, and the thing is, because the pillar has fallen and everybody's just like, I'm surprised nobody ran up there to see if they were okay. But I guess maybe they were so concerned, like, what the fudge do we do? And then in that moment, you can't see what he sees. So nobody could see the face that he put on when it was just her and him. But him standing up with her, and then everybody's gathered, like, what do we do? And then they all part like the Red Sea, and he has her in his arms, like carrying her bridal style out of that. I love the symbolism of him coming out of the temple, carrying her in his arms, and Locken is facing the other way. They're facing opposite directions. And he's like cradling her in his arms, and she's like bleeding. Oh my God. Like that imagery of the two of them walking side by side. And he's like carrying her away from him. Because here's the thing. Locken's whole deal in talking with Jinshi is that clearly Locken was jealous that these other men that were of higher status than him and had more money than him were able to try and have the opportunity to buy out MaoMao's mother. And he couldn't stand that. So he intentionally made her of less value so that they couldn't get what he wanted. Did he end up getting her? No, but then nobody else could, right? So it almost feels, in a sense, like he was trying to get this to the point where if I can't be with my daughter, then no one will, because I'm going to get her involved in this. And that could be wrong. That could not be the entire story. But it does feel fitting symbolically that just like with the woman he loved, with this daughter, he thought that he would just be able to have her all to himself and make her in his debt after all this was said and done. But probably, whether or not he realized Jinshi was the one giving the ceremony or not, that's the question. Did he realize it was Jinshi giving the ceremony? We don't know. But maybe he knew it was somebody of noble birth and was just like, I'm not concerned about it. But the moment Jinshi walks out with her in his arms, he's like, shit. Not only did she get hurt, which I'm sure he didn't want her to get hurt. Not only did she get hurt, her leg was bleeding as they were walking. Not only did she get hurt, not only was the assassination attempt not successful, whether he wanted it to be or not, but it was Jinshi, the emperor's son, brother, and Jinshi's carrying her out. Like, MaoMao is not going to get reprimanded for this. She's probably going to get praised for stopping the assassination attempt, and someone of higher status just took away something that he wanted again. And he can't devalue her in Jinshi's eyes. And oh my God, like, and him just standing there in the shadows and Jinshi walking away with her in his arms. Like, in that moment, any other noble figure, because MaoMao's just a servant girl. So any other noble figure that was saved by her probably would not be carried out bridal style across the courtyard in front of everyone by the emperor's brother's son. I fixed it up that time. But yeah, so anybody else, any other servant girl who went in there to stop an assassination attempt and got hurt, they probably would have been like, oh, hey, call the doctor, have somebody come get this girl. We're all good. Go see to her wounds and take her away. The fact that Jinshi personally carried her out, the emperor's brother/son carried her out in front of Locken, like, screw you. Yeah, I do care about her. What about it? I don't think Locken was expecting that because of how absolutely mortified he looks in that moment. I don't think he was expecting that. Yeah. And Jinshi doing it in front of everyone. Carrying her in front of everyone. Like, everybody's like, the gossip. All the eunuchs are like, the gossip, the tea. Like, yes. And they're all like sweat drops like, shit. Our prince was almost killed. And I love Jinshi having this quiet fury, because you know he's furious. But just having this moment of carrying her, oh my god. And just out of the palace and leaving Locken behind. And Locken's like, shit, what have I done? That's a face of, what have I done? Yep. And everybody is just watching him. And the thing is, Jinshi is walking in royal clothes past all of these people. And MaoMao's unconscious for all of it. Like, all of the evidence of Jinshi's lineage is right there in front of her. All the evidence she needs to get her conjecture verified. And she's not privy to any of it. So the episode's called Chance or Something More. Was this all chance that she discovered all of this together, or was it something else? Well, I think we can make the determination it's probably something more. But yeah, him carrying her and then going into the shadows. Oh my god. And he's like, this woman saved my life. As he walks out with her and she's like slowly bleeding on the ground. And he just has to keep his composure while he carries her out. Because he doesn't want to give too much away. Oh my god. Like, he gets to be the hero that saves her. And she saved him. Oh my god. I'm in love with this episode. This episode is so freaking good. You know he's gonna go into overdrive now trying to figure all this out. You just know it, right? You just know it. And I'm like, so yeah. Yes. I'm so excited for the next episode because I think that Locken orchestrated the assassination of Jinshi at this point? No, I do not. I think he was trying to use the assassination for his own personal gain. And it backfired on him spectacularly, but I don't think that he was necessarily involved in the attempt itself. I feel like Suirei is definitely involved. Suirei be screwed, right? Suirei is screwed. Because I think they're going to connect the dots. Especially now that MaoMao's like, oh no, we're going to connect dots. But now, how is she connected with Locken? Is she connected with Locken? Is she connected with Lolan? We're going to have to figure it out. If Lolan and Suirei were like having a Yuri romance, I would die. So we're going to see if that is the case. Oh, that's why Lolan didn't care about the Kama Sutra. She's like, bitch, I'm already doing this with a woman. It's fine. But we'll just have to wait and see. So, in any case, I love this episode to pieces. I'm so excited to see what you all think about it. Please let me know in the comments down below. But I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yes, I'll be back next week with episode 20 of the Apothecary Diaries. See you then!